So, my story is not one where I was the target of somebody else's stalking or harassment, but one where I was the guy who was just at the right place at the right time. And I'm fairly certain that my inadvertent intervention may have saved someone that I'd never met from, well, who knows what. So, this was back in 2015 or 2016. I'm a career tow truck driver, and at this point, I've been towing cars for almost most of my adult life, and will likely do so until I either retire or I pass away, whichever comes first. At the time, I was working for a pretty small towing company with only 2 employees, and we rotated who was on call each weekend. It was my weekend on call, and it was summer, so with people being out and about sort of late and whatnot, I was pretty busy that week. Cleaning up accidents, towing broken cars down, both in the city and off the highway. I was fine with it, as I was paid commission at the time, so the more calls that I did, the more money I made. It was Saturday night, now Sunday morning, and it's around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and like I said, I've been really busy. As such, I'm a bit tired, a little grumpy, and kind of want to just go home when my phone rings. It's an insurance company calling, asking if we can do a tow for one of their customers who has broken down on the side of the highway. The breakdown location they gave me is about 15 miles out of town, which I normally wouldn't have done, but the tow destination happens to be a dealership that's just a couple of minutes from my apartment. I sort of contemplate rejecting the call, but because I'm paid commission, I figure screw it. I can run up and grab this car, drop it off around the corner from my place, then hopefully I can head home and get a couple of hours of shut-eye. So, in the end, I take the call and hop on the highway. The insurance company provided me with the customer's first name, Kara, and gave me a phone number for her. Usually I try to make contact with people who are on the side of the highway to let them know that I'm on my way and give them an ETA. I try calling her a couple of times, but she doesn't answer. Not completely unusual. After a short while, though, I see hazard lights up the way on the shoulder, so I turn on my strobes and start slowing down. As I approach, I notice that not only is there the late model car that I'm looking for, but there's another car on the scene as well that doesn't have its hazards on, but is parked in front of the car that I'm meant to be towing. This is annoying, but not uncommon, as I need to be able to get in front of the disabled car in order to load it up, and sometimes people just don't realize that. But because the other car is there, I instead pull up behind both cars. You do this so that as the tow driver, you're the one that has to make the weird maneuver of pulling off the shoulder and back onto the shoulder, and that the other car just has to drive straight forward on the shoulder. Otherwise, if I pulled up in front, then the other car would have to go around me, and it's just unprofessional and unsafe to make them do that. Standing at the trunk of the late model car, which is now directly in front of me, are a man and a woman. The woman is probably maybe in her early 20s and dressed to the nines for a night out. She's about 5'1" or 5'2". She's wearing tight leatherish or something pants, a halter top, long black hair, very pretty. The man is probably around 5'10" and skinny, maybe 150 to 160 pounds, wearing a dark hoodie and dirty jeans. They're standing very close too, facing each other. She has her arms crossed and he's leaning down talking to her. I step down out of my truck and approach them both and introduce myself. They separate a few feet and I look to the woman and say, "Are you Kara?" And she nods. I say that I'm here for her insurance company and ask what's going on with the car. Immediately, the man pipes up and says, "Yeah, it's just having some fuel issues. It's an easy fix. Can you just drop it off at this commuter parking lot? I'm going to fix it up there for her." I'm rather annoyed at this, to be honest, because the commuter lot in question is further up the highway and I'm already 15 miles out of town. Like I said before, I only took this call because it was supposed to be coming back toward my apartment, and I just really wanted to get home at this point. Not only that, but in order to change the original tow destination, I would have to call the insurance company back, wait on hold for who knows how long for a representative, and then on top of that, let them know of the change and try to get them to pay me extra for the deadhead miles back home after unloading. And I really didn't want to do any of this. And thirdly, this is a late model car. I'm no mechanic, but it's new enough for whatever is wrong with it that it's likely covered under warranty anyway, so the dealership is really the best place for it to go anyways. I explain all of this to the guy, but he's just not really having it. He even gets stern with me, saying something like, "Look man, you just need to take the car where I tell you to take it." We go back and forth on this for maybe 60 seconds, and he's just getting madder. And well, you know what, man? You're not the named insured. Kara is. The easy way to settle this is to just ask what she wants me to do with the car, and whatever she wants is what I'll do. Fingers crossed, she'll want to take it to the dealership so I can just get home sooner. I turn to look at Kara to ask her that question, and I don't see her right away. She's no longer standing where she was just a minute ago. She was slightly off to my right. I continue to not see her until I've turned almost all the way around, because now she's standing directly behind me. And by directly, I mean within an inch of my back, arms still crossed. I look down at her and she locks eyes with me, and her eyes are as wide as plates, almost owl-like, and immediately it feels like she's just staring into my soul. She didn't say a word, and to be honest, she didn't have to. I took a step back and did what felt like a double take, I guess. I looked at him, then at her, then at him again, and then back at her, and it slowly started to dawn on me that maybe something just wasn't right. I asked her, "Do you know this guy?" And she ever so slightly shook her head no, and the expression on her face when I asked her that will be forever burned in my skull. I turned to the guy and was like, "Oh, you gotta go, man." Now, I'm not a tough guy. I'm a total beta male, to be honest. If there's such a thing, I guess, and I don't care who knows it. I've got nothing to prove. I'm super averse to confrontation and will run at the first sign of trouble. And I'm not exactly the biggest of guys either. I am, however, what I like to call sturdy, I guess. I'm 5'8" and 240 pounds. I have a bit of a gut, but I also have big thighs and broad shoulders, and people are generally surprised to find out that I weigh as much as I do. And quite honestly, I think that might have been my saving grace for what happened next. Because without a word, the guy starts to move for Kara, and I move to stay in between them. He tries to push me out of the way by shoving me in my chest, but because I believe he underestimated my weight, only pushed me hard enough to make me take a single step back. Immediately, I took that step forward towards him and body checked him hard as I could really, hard enough to completely knock him over, basically onto his butt. Because we rotated during the back and forth push bit, Kara is now in front of me to my right, somewhat between me and the guy who's trying to scramble to his feet. I reached out and snatched the poor girl up by her wrist, spun her towards my truck and yelled for her to get into the driver's seat, and she does. I turn back to the guy who's standing up again at this point, and he's breathing really hard. He gets right up in my face but doesn't do anything, just breathes at me. I stare him right in his face and, mustering up the best dad voice I can muster, just say, "You need to go." Mind you, I'm shaking now and I'm absolutely terrified. I don't know if he has a weapon, I don't know if he's going to try to fight me, and I don't know what I would do if he did. Like I said, I'm not a tough guy. I really don't know how to fight. I've never been in a fight in my life. But what if I get badly hurt? What if I get stabbed? What do I even do now? I just want to go home, man. I wasn't even going to take this call. All this is running through my head at lightning speed, and after probably around 15 seconds or so, which felt like forever, he just kind of huffs a bit, smiles one of the creepiest smiles that I've ever seen, and starts to back off. He sort of sucks his teeth and rubs his hands together. He slowly walks backwards a few steps and then makes his way to the front of the car, gets in and just drives off. I just sort of stood there for a few seconds, motionless, watching him until I could no longer see his taillights. I got Kara's car loaded up on the tow truck, and as we made our way to the dealership, she told me through tears that her car had shut off while she was driving, and she pulled onto the shoulder and called her parents because she was on their insurance. Her parents made the call to the insurance company, who eventually dispatched me to her location. While she was waiting, a bit after she made the call, the guy pulled up in front of her and walked up to her passenger side window to try to talk to her, asking if she needed help, etc. And she told him that she was fine, that a tow truck was coming, and she didn't need any help. He apparently persisted, and she tried to tell him off and eventually tried to roll up the window, but apparently he stuck his arm in the window and got the door unlocked and opened the door. In fear, she jumped out of the car, leaving her phone inside, and ran to the back of her car and stayed put there because it was in line of sight of the traffic. Apparently, too, he was really lewd with her, and whenever she tried to go back to the car, he would prevent her from getting in. Several minutes later, I showed up. And honestly, who knows what would have happened had the timing been any different. Her parents were waiting at the dealership when we arrived, and she told them what had just happened. Her parents gave me a $20 tip, which was all the cash that they had on them at the time, and Kara gave me a very tight and clearly heartfelt hug before I left. And after that, I never saw her again. But I tell you what, every guy has daydreamed at some point of coming to the rescue of a pretty girl in trouble, right? Myself included. You think that you're going to be a hero. You're going to slay the dragon and get the girl and ride off into the sunset like the king you are, right? But for me, being in that situation, in that moment, was one of the most terrible feelings that I've ever had. Forced into a confrontation that I didn't even want, nor was prepared for, not knowing what to expect from a clearly not well-hinged individual. I really did not feel like a hero that night. I felt like a scared little kid encountering a bully on the playground for the first time. If I'm ever in a situation like that again, I don't think I'll ever not intervene, if I'm being honest. But I just really hope that I never have to do that ever again. So, I've spent a lot of my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit that North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, I frequently drive up there and hike and camp. This time, I went up with my family in an RV and stayed with them in the Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off about 10 miles away at the Cold Mountain Trailhead, and I'd planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced in hiking or camping, but I had never camped alone at this point. On top of that, I didn't bring a pistol, something I won't go without now, but anyway, on the way up, the trail was surprisingly strenuous. Not necessarily steep. I've hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like a ton of ups and downs and feeling like it just would never end. Eventually, it began to get darker, and I realized that I needed to stop and set up while I still had light. So I stopped about a half a mile short of the summit and figured that I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot, made my food, and went into the tent. At this point, I realized that I hadn't run into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon would be. I have trouble sleeping at the best of times, and usually lay awake for up to an hour trying to sleep. And during this time, I could have sworn that I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the steps. In the end, I just sort of brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull out my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag, just in case. That morning, I woke up and I ate some oatmeal, and as I ate, I looked over at my tent at some point, and I noticed that there was a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries tied with green cord now propped up against my tent. Internally, I was half scared to death, but I quickly packed up my stuff and took off within 5 minutes. and no way was I bothering to go to the summit that day. I headed straight down, and on the way down I realized that there was a pretty heavy fog, and I ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I got lost. I used a compass to eventually reorientate myself and found the trail again. One of the biggest reliefs, let me tell you, and I made my way out there with no other incident. However, I came to find out the same morning that apparently a 27-year-old person died on the same section of trail as me, and it's possible that I would have run into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. And I guess that's the scariest part, knowing that someone knew where I was and watched me, and I had no idea that they were even there.